this is another, this is not our birds, but we're trying to figure out a more aesthetically pleasing model of our coops because they're very visible and we're pulling them all over town. So this is just another picture that we liked that you could easily put a center run colony nest system in. So we're trying to figure out, in a few years when we build the next iteration, maybe it'll look something like that. All right.
Again, what birds are they growing? I mean, they're standard brown ugly-layers.
So this is a picture everybody always asks us where we get our automatic door opener. We've had it on our website. We got this in 2004. Yeah. Once we realized that we wanted to sleep in on Sunday mornings or something and not go out and open up the nest box coop and let the chickens out. So ordered this from the UK and then...
There's a million out there now. In the beginning there were none. Now there's a lot of versions. This one they don't make anymore. They're called VSB1. They make a much snazzier version now, but they're not cheap either. $125, I think, something like that.
But it's great. It's good for predator protection as well, as long as your birds go inside.
The guy's got it used to be like Chicken House, something or other. Folks familiar with them? They're in the UK. I think the actual device is made in Germany.
Winter housing. Again, this is our old coop, but we built the new nest box coop so that you can basically just drive it in the winter time. So they're still laying in the same nest box that they're laying in on pasture all year long. So they're very familiar with it. It's an easy transition for them. And then we keep their roosting coops outside the greenhouse. So they have to go back and forth in the snow, out a pop door out the side of the greenhouse to go get into their roosting space. They can come back into the hoop house and lay eggs.
We've had access to big 30 by 100 plus houses and stuff, and it's great. But come February, light is really increasing. They get cannibalistic with so much light. The other thing about building that nest box coop, like I said, we built it intentionally so it can fit into the greenhouse, not just for the benefit of the laying hens, so they had the same structure to lay in and there was no transition for them to go into a greenhouse and all of a sudden there's a whole new nest box set up. But for us, we don't have to then take all our nest boxes out of our coops and reset up the whole damn thing and then start over again. So it was really great system. Just make sure your doors are big enough. We have a friend who did the same thing and then he built giant coops and he was like, damn, I won't fit inside. So, think a little bit ahead if you can.
And then we usually are growing stuff in the hoop houses, so we just throw them in and they eat whatever's in there pretty quickly. And then pretty quickly there's nothing. Or last year when we built a second new hoop house, basically we just got a contractor to come in and filled it full of leaves. Leaves from wherever they're landscaping jobs. And then just that was the source of carbon to have in there to keep it from getting stinky. Because last year was a horrible winter, as you all know, tons of snow. So it was tough. They were in there and a lot more than we would have liked. It got pretty nasty in there by the end of the spring.
We've gone to leaves, which are great because they break down a lot faster than wood chips, and they're free, and the source we have is very clean, no garbage. They tend to mat a little bit, but you get a digging fork or a hay fork in there and you loosen it up. The great thing about it is by the time it's the end of the season, the end of the winter, they've broken that down and the soil is just amazing. The bad thing about the leaves is that they stain. And so if you have grounders, that egg is stained bad, and they have drag leaves in on their feet, and they get on the eggs, and the eggs get stained very easily from the leaves. But other than that, it's a good source of carbon.
We ended up having a group of pigs in the back that turned a bunch of the leaves over inside the house too. And just a quick side note of moving birds from field to field. So, if we're going to move this whole thing off this field into another field, then we do have to, Pete goes out at night in the dark with a headlamp and shoves all the birds inside. Because they do roost, even though they're supposed to be roosting in the two red coops. Some of them, they're sleeping on the running gear underneath or just crunched in the grass or whatever. So moving them off a field to another field is definitely a labor of going out, crawling around in the chicken crap and shoving them inside and then driving them down the street in the dark. With the tractor
So don't forget, when we first get these birds, they are barn-raised birds, and barn-raised birds are floor birds, so they're not used to roosting. They still have their instinct, but some of them just never really get it totally back. So you get, even though you have plenty of roost space, they don't all go inside at night. So you do have birds hang out underneath on a really warm summer night. They're laying out in the middle of the field. And, we lose birds to great horned owls and such, picking off one bird a night sometimes. But when we do have to go catch birds, you know, you may have 700 birds out there and may have to catch, you know, 400 of them and put them inside at night.
So these are our broiler. This is 1.0, and then, or this is even 0.0, long time ago. And then just to show this, so they used to have the solid back, and then he would just raise it up, and they'd go out in day range. And then either side, then you can see here, this is just to show that all the feeder and the water are all inside, and the buckets are on the inside. And that was an important change after we found dead starlings and other birds drowning themselves in the buckets outside the thing, outside the coops. So now all the buckets and everything are on the inside, so nothing's falling in and or sitting on the edge and pooping into your water and other things like that, the birds in the field. So, and now you have plumbed 2 buckets together into each individual coop and all that. So everything's hanging on the inside, so when you're pulling it all, we're not picking up feeders and waters and moving them in the move every day. So this is another, I took a picture of your picture on your phone. That's why it's not good quality, but the friend that we were talking about, the MIT engineers, they had a friend design this really cool cantilevered wheel, which is
So we
awesome.
have wheels on the back of our coops, just keeping the coops a little bit off the ground. And again, everyone's got different styles, so you know, you just do whatever you like. But this is nice because so you take this, it's got one piece 2x4 there, and then the wheel, and then you push this up, the cantilever, and it raises the coop off of the ground a little bit more than in our other coops. And then you put a pin through that hole into the other 2x4, locking it in place. You pull the coop forward and you pull it out and lower the coop again. The nice thing about that is if you do have predation, it really puts that coop really flat down on the ground. But then it raises it up enough to clear the forage to really pull them through nicely.
Yeah. So, and just a case in point, we all of ours are now the hoop coop style because we never did the Joel Salatin flat things. We did a trial at the organization that I run, and everybody hated the Salatin style. We never did it from the beginning because we wanted to be able to physically go in it when we're catching the chickens and be able to crate them up properly. So that was always the nice thing about that.
Yeah, and if you have a bird that's got an issue or has died or something, I like being able to go in there and look at the birds and touch them and instead of crawl through them and stuff like that. So what happened was when we were day ranging and I had that other system where just a dolly hanging out underneath, I stopped doing that because I would try and lower the coop, and then I kept crushing birds because they wouldn't get away from the edges. And so then I just kind of adapted the way I built the coop and built this little pop door on the back. So then I would open it up and then pull the coop forward and all the birds would spill out the back. And it made moving the coops, you know, so fast. You didn't have to worry about running over birds.
And also we use these silver reflective tarps. So these are reflecting the heat away from the coop. So it's cooler underneath rather than a standard tarp that's going to be absorbing the heat. And then now this is more of our setup as well. They're more standard uniform things. We'll talk about the feeder storage in a minute. And then this is what maybe we'll end up moving to. This is not ours, obviously, but a friend of ours, this is not even his, but this is a style like our friend uses, which are a little bit taller steel hoop structure. So another thing, we're just still trying to figure out the aesthetics. The tarp looks kind of sloppy and kind of not aesthetically pleasing. I mean, if you're somewhere where people don't care, but we're in very public fields, so we're trying to figure out how to make them more uniform, more actually nice, something like that, so people don't wonder what the heck they're doing.
And our coops need to be a size where we can move them from field to field and drive down the road. So if you have a huge field, then you can do anything.
So water systems, again, we're bringing all the water to our fields. We don't have water in the fields. So just trying to have the size of the system that you can manage so that the birds never, ever, ever, ever run out of water. So, we have lots of those 250-gallon tanks built into the layer coops out in the field with the broilers, which I'll show you the watering system in a minute. And it's just really important to keep it clean. Those buckets can get filled with algae and get really skanky really fast. So making sure you have a system for going out and washing them and sanitizing those so they don't build up. And that the lips of the water stays clean and that they're at the right height of the birds. So if you first put your little chicks out there, you need to be lower, and then slowly you can raise it. And then the nice part about having everything in those coops is when it's time to catch them, we can just raise the feed up, you leave the water in there, and you're cleaning out their gut for processing. So we've used lots of different bell waters. We don't have these colors. Cool. Before we had our current system, this was something else we had out there in the field, which was another just homemade feeder. and a water tank with the bell water just hanging off of it, which is what we have now, but it's all enclosed. And then this is these are the tanks. We get these for free down in New Bedford area of Massachusetts in the fishing industry, where they do a lot of fish emulsion and whatever, and then somehow the tanks aren't perfect, and so you can go down there and get some of those. If you can grab those, are super invaluable. We use them for everything. We used to use these other barrels on a trailer, and it was a pain in the neck. So we're, the other thing we had to do is find a pickup truck that would hold that much weight in water. Your 3/4 ton pickups won't do that, so you got to have the right kind of vehicle to be able to fill that full of water and move it around and get out in the field. So you want to explain?
Yeah, so now we're just using, these 225-gallon tanks and a 1-inch hose and a 30-gallon-a-minute pump, and we're, basically that tank stays in the back of the truck the whole season. We're constantly hauling water. The broilers will consume, we're doing a group of 500 birds, once they get to a certain size, every 3 days I have to fill up that tank. So it's just hauling a lot of water. And the truck, using that instead of a trailer, the truck is infinitely flexible as far as moving it around. As far as dragging a trailer, it gets a little bit more complicated. So, as you start to scale a little bit and carrying buckets of water, it gets old pretty fast. So we now use a little on-demand 4-gallon-a-minute pump, a car battery, and a 40-watt panel there charging the car battery, and then a white hose that doesn't really maintain a lot of heat from the sun, and with a little float valve. And so when we go out to the field to do the water chores, we plug in attach the pump to the battery, water runs to the end of the Hudson valve. As pressure builds, that pump's an on-demand pump. As pressure builds, hits 40 psi, the pump shuts off. So I take the valve, put it in the bucket, turn it on, water fills up to the valve, shuts it off, and I can be doing feeding, doing other chores as the buckets are being filled in each of these coops, and then I can just fill them up really quick. So within a minute, a bucket is full of water, and I just keep moving along.
So that makes, that for us was like a game changer, when didn't have to sit there and fill each bucket and walk over to each coop. And now we have 7 or 8 coops, or if you want to have even more, basically we're just dragging the hose with this little valve thing and putting it on the top of the bucket. So no carrying the water, it's all being pumped from that larger tank. And so while that's filling, you can be filling the feeders, because we're still doing that manually. But
so you can, some people now who have a water source are creating, spaghetti systems of black tubing and having automatic water in these coops. I think a challenge probably is some of these tubes can get really hot in the summer, so birds that are drinking really slowly can be drinking a lot of hot water, and they're not going to want to do that. But if you have a system for cold water and you can hide that spaghetti tubing so it doesn't get hot in the summer, then they have automatic water all the time. You're just dealing with these, water system.
Anything in the water to deal with, the algae or
Not, we use these reflective tarps we get from Gemplers. They're made for tanks, the silver tarp, and that will keep algae from building in the tank because there's no sunlight getting into the tank. It also keeps the water really cool. Even because we're growing the amount of birds we're using, when I fill that tank up, maybe it only lasts 3 to 5 days. Even on a 90-degree week where it's 95 every day, that water inside that tank is still pretty cool. So they're always getting cool water when we're filling it up in the morning. We can put apple cider vinegar in there. We bought a 225-gallon tank of apple cider vinegar a couple of years ago when we were dealing with worms with our pigs, and we're trying to find natural ways of improving gut health. And so we bought that from the vinegar guys out in Midwest. We bought a huge vat of Fleischmann's apple cider vinegar for big money, but we still have it. We still use it occasionally. But it's a great thing to use.
We mostly use the white marine grade hose because they don't have lead in them as well, so that's a consideration. Regular standard garden hoses have lead in them, so in addition to heating up and absorbing heat, the white reflects the heat, and you're not going to get lead in the water in your chickens. All right, feeders. Feed requirements. Those are the stats. 1/4 pound of feed per day for layers, so that's a good mental thing to have in your mind. You can play with all kinds of different protein rations as you're growing the layers if you're starting them from chicks, but since we're mostly buying started pullets, we just get the standard protein for layers as they're laying. And then we do manipulate the broiler feed as we go along. So we buy the starter. You want to talk about the feeding regime?
Yeah, I mean, again, we buy starter grain from Green Mountain. It's a mash, and then we go to a crumble to 19%. In the industry, you can go
5 or 7 different.
4 or 5 different protein levels. As they get older, you reduce the protein level because it controls how much fat they put on. But it's just not economical for a grower like us to have that much grain sitting around. So we do 20 to 21%, and then we go down to 19. Layers, since right now we're not brooding, but when you're brooding birds, usually it's 21%, and then layer ration is 16%. Sometimes some companies use 17% protein.
Do you withhold feed at night?
We do not withhold feed.
Yeah, some people do, but we don't. That's an extra chore. We try to just go visit the broilers once a day. So to withhold feed, then you got to go at night, lift them up. How are you going to withhold it, and then make sure it's down?
On hot days in summer, we visit the broilers twice to make sure they have enough water. We'll spray down the coops to cool them down a little bit. If we have to, we'll spray the birds themselves with water to cool them down a little bit. So yeah, we use Green Mountain. They have probiotics in the feed. We've been working with Green Mountain for a while. Eric will do custom rations for you if you want to play around with rations.
We know some people, friends of ours down the street, tried to do their own sprouted grain ration this year and failed miserably. Maybe they just didn't know what they were doing, but they're just trying to be experimental. And there's a whole industry of poultry scientists out there that have fine-tuned the poultry rations to the nth degree. In my view, it's great if you can really geek out on that and really do it really well, but it's really tricky to do it really well. So again, it depends on what your goals are, and if you have time and energy to do that, great, but otherwise there's a whole science behind folks and poultry nutritionists. We just find that it's easier to rely on that science to be done for us than try to play around with mixing and milling and doing a lot of all that good stuff. And then there's a lot of consumer demand out there for soy-free feed. So again, we've chosen not to go that route, and we lose customers who want not to consume soy, so they don't want chicken eggs with soy in them or chickens with soy. But Green Mountain does sell a soy-free feed, but they basically have the caveat right here that they're using alternative forms of protein, and it will cause slightly lower production levels than a soy-based feed. And so generally how people are getting more of that protein is going with a fish meal or a kelp meal or other types of protein, or switching over to the flaxseed and the canola and other field peas and other ways of getting it. So we've not done that, but it is available out there if folks are interested. And then a lot of different feeder types. So we have tons of these 50-pound feeders.
Yeah, and you can make your own. There's a million different things you can use.
A friend of ours made this out of a shipping pallet. So nice little thing to pull around. Birds can just come up and peck at it. And then we bought these.
That's not a feeder, it's just a silo. So that holds 1 ton of grain, and we hitch it to the front of our coop so we can have, we have 2 of those, so we can have 2 ton of grain in the field at a time, so we're not constantly driving into the field with grain. So we have these little, unfortunately, when I first bought these, I thought, this is so great. And I went to take my bucket, and I put it underneath here, and the bucket came up to here. And I called the company. I'm like, what the heck? You make this thing for it. You can't even put a bucket underneath it. And he said, well, maybe you can get bigger tires. And I was so mad. So we ended up using this restaurant service tub that holds about the same amount as a bucket. So you open the door and it comes out, and then you take that. And I actually end up carrying that out now and filling up the feeders with that. We like these little feeders. We have a big one. People have huge ones. But you have a big, huge one, and if it's on the ground, you're not going to move it very often. And so your impact zone, we're moving our birds too often to then have to move something like that. So we like the 50-pound range feeders from Cool. That lid never flies off. They're really strong. No water gets inside there. And we move those things every day, twice. If we're feeding them twice a day, usually just once a day, we move it at least from here to here. Because as you know, you have birds, as they're eating, they're scratching, and they're really ripping apart that grass a lot. So just by moving those feeders every day, you're dispersing their impact.
And it's easy to move this whole system because we can put this 1-ton feeder in front of the roosting nest box. They can be pinned together. So when we move the whole thing, we're moving the whole thing. And since we're just hand moving the 50-pound range feeders around, we're not like carrying the feed that far. It's right there in the field. And then once the grain truck is going to come, we can come and grab these out of the field and bring them back, and then they can blow in. Or he can bring out his 1-ton totes.
They're not cheap. When I bought these, they were $2,000 each.
They hitch together like a train.
And I like the 4-wheel because they're stable. You know, you don't have to worry about them tipping over. So you have a little 25 horsepower 4-wheel drive Kubota, and we just hitch them together. And you know the gang plank, we just push up, hold it with a bungee, and we just move them forward. We used to move the birds at night, but now the birds are kind of everywhere, so we just do it during the day. You know, 99 times out of 100, no problem. Once in a while, you know, you have a lot of wheels moving there, and the bird
Sometimes
gets like caught.
you got
and
spaghetti guts shooting out.
when
but
you hear
yeah,
the squeal.
that does not happen that often, but I've seen it happen. It's nasty. Yeah.
And that's the custom built for us from a welder guy we know. It's a 3-ton silo that we use now with our meat birds. And that is actually great. It's got a chute here, a little platform for a bucket, and you know, we waste not a pellet of grain. No birds get in it, no mice get in it. Everything's 100% dry. You know, you can tow it full. It's, you know, a little bit scary towing it. What's that?
Is that an old boat trailer?
No, that's custom made, that whole thing, yeah.
But that's nice because that's 3 tons right there. So you just pull it back, the grain truck comes, boom, done. Your broiler feed's in there. So
What did that cost?
$3,000, I think.
no, well, we have a 4-ton one as well that he uses for the pig grain, and so that we did get an auger for that system, so that you could theoretically go out and auger into.
No,
any of
that
these
won't
other
reach
ones.
that height, so that only has to be filled by the feed company. We do have a hydraulic auger on our 4-ton wagon we use for the pigs, but not this one's too high. That's a 4-ton one, which we have an auger on now. And that one also was a first generation of the wheeled one, but this one's on this holds 4.5 ton, and it's just on steel.
So once we
feed.
bought a bunch of coops and this from another guy who decided to stop doing pasture-raised stuff, and so this is the only stationary one that we own, and so that lives near the brooder, which was a game changer again to save money, to go from buying bagged starter broiler feed to being able to buy bulk starter feed, which is great.